To my son-in-law, Derek, this jacket meant I had no business being in the same room as him. It was a brown Carhartt work jacket, the kind you buy at a hardware store, worn at the elbows, smelling faintly of sawdust and motor oil. I'd had it for 11 years. Derek noticed it the first night. My daughter Claire brought him home for dinner, and I watched his eyes travel from the jacket to my hands to the modest kitchen behind me, and I saw him make a calculation. I could see exactly what he decided in that moment. I let him decide it. My name is Frank Calloway. I'm 63 years old. I drive a 2009 Chevy pickup with a cracked passenger side mirror I keep meaning to fix. I eat lunch at a diner called Patty's on Route 9, where the coffee costs $1.75, and the waitresses call me honey. I mow my own lawn. I take my garbage out to the curb myself on Thursday mornings. My neighbors have known me for 20 years, and I don't think a single one of them knows what I actually own. That's how I want it. That's always how I've wanted it. 35 years ago, I started a small commercial property company with $12,000 I'd saved working construction. I didn't call it Calloway anything. I called it Ridgeline Property Group, which sounded established and serious, and I registered it in the name of the holding company my attorney set up. I was 28 years old, and I was terrified and certain I was about to lose everything. Instead, it grew. Slowly at first, then steadily, then in ways that still quietly surprise me when I look at the quarterly statements my CFO sends over. Today, Ridgeline owns 47 commercial properties across 4 states, office buildings, retail strips, 2 mixed-use developments, and 1 8-story professional complex in downtown Hartford that I am particularly proud of. I have never needed anyone to know this. My late wife, Patricia, knew, of course. Claire knew there were investments and some properties. She knew we were comfortable. She did not know the scale, because I didn't raise her to think in terms of scale. I raised her to think in terms of character and effort. She is the finest person I know. She got her mother's warmth and her mother's laugh, and her mother's stubborn belief that people are basically good until they prove otherwise. Derek proved otherwise. It just took a while to become impossible to ignore. He came into Claire's life 3 years ago. He was 38, sharp-looking, worked in commercial real estate development. I'll come back to that, and he had the kind of confidence that fills a room before he does. He shook my hand the first night like he was doing me a courtesy. He talked about his deals over dinner the way other people talk about their children, with a pride that left no room for anyone else to contribute to the conversation. Claire watched him with this expression I recognized. It was the expression her mother used to get watching a beautiful thunderstorm. Impressed and slightly wary at the same time. I liked that she was wary. I thought it meant she was paying attention. I was wrong, or I was right too late. They were engaged within 8 months. The wedding was at a vineyard in the Berkshires, and Derek's parents flew in from their home in Scottsdale, Arizona, where they'd retired after his father's insurance firm was bought out by a larger company in the late 90s. They were pleasant enough at the wedding, but there was a quality to the pleasantness that felt like a performance of manners rather than actual warmth. Derek's mother, Sylvia, complimented my pocket square in the way you compliment a child's drawing. After the wedding, things shifted gradually. The way water erodes, something you don't see the damage day to day, but you look one morning and the stone has changed shape. Derek and Claire settled into a condo in West Hartford. Derek's firm gave him a significant promotion. He was now VP of Acquisitions, which meant he was the one traveling to site visits and signing off on development proposals and generally presenting himself as the face of the company's ambitions. The money was good. The title was better. And Derek, I noticed, began to use both as a kind of measuring stick he held up to everyone he met. At family dinners, he began finishing Claire's sentences, not because he knew what she meant to say, but because he had decided what she should be saying. He started making small comments about her choices. The restaurant she suggested was a chain, not somewhere serious. The friends she kept from college were sweet, but a little provincial. Did she really need to call her father every Sunday? It was very high school of her. Each comment was wrapped in a smile that made it hard to object to without looking like you couldn't take a joke. I am a patient man. I come from patient people. My father worked 30 years in a textile mill and never once raised his voice in anger that I witnessed. Patience is not weakness. Patience is knowing when to speak and when to let a situation complete itself. I watched Derek, and I waited, and I told myself that Claire was a grown woman with her mother's good instincts, and she would find her footing. Then last spring, Claire called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Not Sunday, Tuesday. Her voice had a careful, controlled quality that I recognized as the voice a person uses when they are holding something very heavy and trying not to let you see the weight of it. She told me Derek had decided they needed to restructure their finances. He'd moved their joint savings into an account she didn't have login access to. He said it was more efficient to manage from one place. He said she had a tendency to make impulse purchases, which was affecting their investment timeline. He said this in front of his mother, who nodded, as if this was a reasonable and mature decision by a responsible husband. I gripped the phone very hard. I asked Claire if she was all right. She said, of course, yes, she was fine. She just wanted to mention it. She was sure it was just Derek being organized. He got like that sometimes. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. I called my attorney, a woman named Sandra Hewitt, who has handled Ridgeline's legal affairs for 18 years and who has never once raised her voice but has made grown men weep in mediation. I told her to begin quietly reviewing what options Claire might have. I did not yet tell Claire I had done this. 2 months after that phone call, Derek's firm Whitmore Commercial Development submitted a lease proposal for office space in one of Ridgeline's downtown Hartford properties. The 8-story building I mentioned, the one I'm particularly proud of. They wanted the entire 4th floor, 11,000 square feet, 5-year term. The proposal came to my property manager, a man named Gene who has worked for Ridgeline for 14 years. Gene forwarded it to me, as he forwards all proposals above a certain square footage threshold. I looked at the header, Whitmore Commercial Development, VP of Acquisitions, Derek Allen Purcell. I sat with that for a moment. Then I called Gene and told him to proceed with the application process in the normal way. Standard review, standard response timeline, nothing unusual. I did not mention it to Claire. I did not mention it to Derek. I want you to understand something, because I know some of you are already shaking your heads. Why not just tell him? Why not just reveal yourself and watch him scramble? I'll tell you why. Because a man who scrambles when he's caught is not the same as a man who shows you who he is when he thinks no one important is watching. I wanted to see who Derek was when he thought I was nobody. I had been seeing it in pieces for 2 years. I needed to see it whole. I got my chance in October. Derek's parents came back from Scottsdale for their annual visit. To celebrate, or to perform celebration, I was no longer sure which. Derek made a reservation at a restaurant in Hartford called Aldous, which is the kind of place where the menu has no prices and the parking valet has better posture than most people I know. He invited me. He was gracious about it in the way that made clear the graciousness was its own kind of condescension. He wanted me there. I understood that he wanted me there the way you want a particular prop in a photograph. I wore my good khakis and a blue button-down shirt that Patricia had given me on my 55th birthday. It was a perfectly nice shirt. It was not the kind of shirt Aldous was expecting. The valet looked at my truck the way you look at a word you don't know how to pronounce. I gave him a $10 bill and thanked him by name. He relaxed a little. People usually do. Inside, Derek's parents were already seated. His father, Robert, had the firm handshake and the permanent Florida tan of a man who considers both forms of currency. Sylvia was wearing something I suspected cost more than my first car. They were warm in the practiced way of people who've attended a lot of functions. I was seated at the corner of the table, which I noted. Derek ordered for the table. He did not ask if that was all right. The conversation moved across topics the way Derek preferred all conversations to move, with him at the center of each one. He talked about the 4th floor acquisition in Hartford. He talked about it at length. He said Whitmore was locked into a space in an older Ridgeline building. He used the word older with a slight wince, as if accommodating a disappointment, but that the location was solid and the lease terms had come in reasonable. He said the ownership group had been straightforward, if not particularly sophisticated. I drank my water. Sylvia asked me what I did. The question arrived between the bread course and the salad, casual and slightly delayed, as if she'd only just remembered to include me. I told her I had some properties. She nodded the way people nod when they've received information that requires no follow-up. Derek smiled at his water glass. Robert talked about his golf handicap. The main course arrived. The conversation drifted to Derek and Claire's plans for a European trip the following spring, which was the first time I was hearing about it. Claire glanced at me when it came up, quickly, and then glanced away. I kept my expression easy. Then, between the entree and the dessert menu, Sylvia set her wine glass down with a small, deliberate click and looked at me directly for the first time all evening. She said she wanted to discuss something practical. She said that Derek and Claire were at an important stage of building their life together, and that certain things needed to be aligned for that life to reach its full potential. She said this with the careful wording of someone who has rehearsed. She said that she felt, and she wanted to be respectful, but also honest, that my presence in Claire's life, as loving as it clearly was, represented a kind of anchor to a certain background and a certain set of expectations that might be limiting for Claire as she grew into her new life. She said Claire was flourishing. She said sometimes the kindest thing a parent could do was allow that flourishing to happen without, she paused here, chose her word without unnecessary weight. I looked at her. I looked at Derek, who was studying his fork. I looked at Robert, who took a long sip of his wine. I put down my napkin. I want to be honest with you about what happened inside me in that moment. There was anger. Genuine, hot, quiet anger. The kind that doesn't make noise because it doesn't need to. I thought about Patricia, who would have said something sharp and elegant and unanswerable. I thought about Claire, who didn't know this conversation was planned. I thought about the 11,000 square feet on the 4th floor of my building, which Derek Purcell had signed a letter of intent on 6 weeks earlier. I thought about patience. I asked Sylvia, very calmly, what she had in mind by unnecessary weight. She reached into her purse and produced an envelope. She placed it on the table and slid it toward me. She said it was a gesture of good faith. She said it was $75,000, and that they hoped it would give me the space to, she used the word, transition into a chapter that was perhaps better suited to where I was in life. The table was very quiet. The restaurant made its soft, expensive sounds around us. I picked up the envelope. I held it. I set it back down. I said, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. You're asking me to step back from my daughter's life in exchange for $75,000. Sylvia said that was perhaps a stark way of putting it, but essentially, yes. Derek did not look up from his fork. I nodded slowly. I picked up my phone from beside my bread plate. I found the number I needed. I called Jean. Jean picked up on the second ring. I said, Jean, I need you to pull the Whitmore commercial development file. He said, yes, sir. I said, their letter of intent on the Hartford property. I need you to mark it withdrawn and send a formal notice to their VP of acquisitions. Tonight. Jean paused for just a moment and then said, understood, Mr. Calloway, I'll take care of it. I thanked him and put the phone down. Derek's head came up. I looked at him. I said his name. Derek. I said, I own Ridgeline Property Group. I have owned it for 35 years. The building your firm just signed a letter of intent on is mine. The lease you've been negotiating through Gene Passetti. Gene works for me. He has for 14 years. The color left Derek's face in a way I had not seen happen to a person before. It was not dramatic. It was simply sudden and complete. I said, I also want you to know that my attorney has been reviewing the joint financial accounts you restructured in the spring, the ones you moved without Claire's access. Sandra's thorough. She finds things. Sylvia's wine glass was still raised halfway to her mouth. Robert set his fork down. I picked up the envelope and placed it back in front of Sylvia with a steadiness I was genuinely proud of in that moment. I said, keep this. Give it to your son. He's going to need it. I stood up. I thanked them for dinner. I thanked the server by name. His name was Thomas, and he had been excellent all evening. I left a cash tip on the table because I always do, regardless of whether the bill is being picked up by someone else. I walked out through the front of Aldous, and the valet brought my truck around, and I sat behind the wheel for a moment in the cool October night. Then I called Sandra. Then I called Claire. That call was the hardest and the most important call of my life, since the one I'd had to make 8 years ago when Patricia got sick. I told Claire everything. About the envelope, about the conversation, about what I owned, and what Derek had signed, and what Sandra had found in the financial accounts. I did not editorialize. I just told her. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Dad," and her voice had that quality her mother's voice used to get, not breaking, exactly, but opened up, like a window you've had shut too long, finally letting the air in. She said, "I think I've known something was wrong for a long time." I said, "I know, sweetheart." She said, "I need some time." I said, "Take whatever you need. Sandra's number is in your phone. You call her when you're ready." She did call Sandra. 3 days later, Sandra, who has seen everything in 25 years of family law, told me afterward that Claire walked into that meeting with more composure and clarity than most clients she sees who've had months to prepare. That's her mother in her. That's all her mother. The 4th floor of the Hartford building went to a regional accounting firm that signed a 7-year lease and has been a model tenant. Jean handled the transition without a ripple. Derek's firm discovered, about 6 weeks after that evening at Aldous, that the Ridgeline property had been the linchpin of a larger Hartford expansion they were planning. Without that space and that address, 2 other pieces of the deal fell through. I did not engineer that. I simply withdrew what was mine, and the consequences arranged themselves naturally. Derek's position at Whitmore became complicated after that, from what I understand. I also understand, through Sandra, that the financial review of the joint accounts raised questions about a pattern of transfers that had been moving money from the household accounts into what appeared to be a private discretionary fund in Derek's name alone. Not enormous sums, but consistent ones, and deliberately obscured. Sandra referred the matter to a colleague who handles those specific issues. I don't think about Derek much anymore. What I think about is what Claire said to me on a Sunday evening about 4 months after that dinner, when she came over and we sat in the same kitchen where I'd first shaken Derek's hand and I made us both coffee the way I always make it strong, in a regular drip machine, in mugs that have been in this house since the 90s. She said, "I used to be embarrassed, you know, not of you, never of you, but that he could see you and think you were less than him. I was embarrassed that I couldn't make him see what I saw." I told her, "Don't be. Some people can only see what's on the surface. That's not a failure of yours. That's a limitation of theirs." She wrapped both hands around her mug the way her mother always did. She said, "How long did you know? About the building and the lease?" I said, "A couple of months." She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "I wanted to let you get there on your own. I didn't want to pull you somewhere. I wanted to be there when you arrived." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is extremely dad of you," and she smiled. And it was her mother's smile, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and the old wood of the house, and outside the leaves were coming down off the maple in the backyard, the way they do every November, steady and unhurried, covering the ground in gold. I have been building things my whole life, buildings mostly. Physical structures with foundations and load-bearing walls and fire codes and permits. Things that have to be done correctly, or they fall down. And what I know, from 35 years of building things, is that nothing that lasts was ever built on contempt. You can't pour a foundation out of disdain for the ground beneath you. It doesn't hold. Eventually, always, the structure finds its own level. Derek thought the worn jacket meant I had no standing in the room. He didn't understand that the room was mine. Some of you watching right now, I know you. You're the one in your family who never quite fits the image of what success is supposed to look like. You drive the practical car. You eat at the practical restaurants. You don't explain yourself because you've never needed anyone's permission to be who you are. Some people look at you and calculate a number. They get the number wrong every time. Let them. Let them keep getting it wrong. Patience isn't waiting for something to happen. Patience is knowing something is already true and giving it the time it needs to become visible. Thank you for being here with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.